"Don't wear the uniform tonight. It looks cheap." My mother said that to me at the entrance of the Belmont Carriage Hotel, her hands still busy fixing the collar of my sister's blouse. A waiter passing behind her stopped mid-step. The tray of champagne in his hand tilted maybe an inch, then went still. The whole reception hall seemed to take one breath at the same time. This was my parents' 30th anniversary party. I had driven 6 hours to get there. I arrived 17 minutes early, out of an old habit I never managed to break. What my mother didn't know was that I had an envelope in my bag. Inside it was something I had kept quiet for 22 years. Not a medal, not a photo, just paperwork. But it was enough that, 4 months later, a woman in dress uniform would walk into a family meeting, and my mother would not be able to say a single word. I wish I could tell you that moment felt good. It didn't. I just felt tired. The kind of tired that one night of sleep doesn't fix. To understand why that night happened at all, you need to understand the kind of family I grew up in. My name is Margaret Halloran. Most people call me Maggie, though my mother has called me Margaret my whole life, usually in the tone you'd use right before a lecture. I was 54 that summer. I had spent most of my adult life in the army, in a job nobody at family dinners ever bothered to understand. When relatives asked what I did, I'd say finance, and they'd nod and look for the cheese plate. That was fine. I learned a long time ago that the less you explain, the less people have to argue with. I want to tell you about the right knee first, because it shows up a lot in this story. It's been bad since a training accident outside Fort Stewart, years ago now. It aches before rain. Every cat forecaster in Tennessee could retire if they just called me. That morning, driving up toward Chattanooga, it had been throbbing since the second gas station, which told me the sky was going to open up before the night was done. I was right about that too. I lived alone by then in a small place outside Clarksville. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that smelled like coffee no matter how much I cleaned, and a back porch I'd added a cheap rocking chair to. $40 bought off an older couple who were moving to Florida. Best money I spent that whole year. Most evenings I sat out there with the radio low. That was the whole life. People hear Army and picture something dramatic. Mostly it was spreadsheets, bad coffee, and a body that filed complaints louder every year. Here is the thing about my family that took me 5 decades to say out loud. I was the one they called, not the one they invited. There's a difference, and it's a big one. My younger sister Diane was the one they invited. Diane was the pretty one, the one who cried easy and got rescued fast. When we were kids and somebody teased her at school, I walked her home. When she overdrew her checking account in college, I wired the money from a barracks in Texas. And 6 years before that anniversary party, when Diane racked up $8,412 on a credit card she couldn't pay, I covered it. Quietly. I never brought it up again. Not once. I thought that made me a good sister. Looking back, I think it just taught everybody where the money came from. My father, Walter, was a quieter kind of difficult. He didn't insult you to your face. He just looked past you. For years he told neighbors I was career military, never settled down, in a voice that made it sound like a diagnosis. He once asked me, at a Thanksgiving table, whether I planned to act like a soldier forever. I said I'd think about it. He laughed like that settled something. My mother, Eleanor, was the engine of the whole thing. She loved Diane out loud and loved me in errands. There was always something she needed me to handle. Paperwork, a ride, a bill, a problem nobody else wanted to touch. I was useful. I told myself useful was the same as loved. It took a long time and a lot of money to learn it wasn't. The drive up was loud with cicadas and a country station that kept fading in and out through the hills. Somewhere past Manchester, I stopped at a gas station with a hand-painted sign that said fresh boiled peanuts, and I bought a bag I didn't really want just to stand outside for a minute. The air smelled like hot asphalt and somebody's brisket smoker down the road. There was a flag on the station's porch, faded almost white, snapping in the wind. I remember thinking the sky behind it looked like a bruise coming up. I got back in the truck. My knee throbbed. I drove the last 2 hours into Chattanooga with the windows cracked. The Belmont Carriage Hotel sat up on a rise above the river, all brick and ivy and valet kids in red vests. My parents had picked it because it photographed well. Everything my mother did, she did for the photograph. The party was supposed to be 100 guests, a string trio, the whole production. Diane had planned most of it. Diane planned everything in our family that involved an audience. I parked my truck myself, down at the far end, where the valets wouldn't have to touch it. Force of habit. You park near the exit. You always know how to leave. That's when my mother found me at the door and told me the uniform looked cheap. I wasn't in uniform. I want to be clear about that. I was in a navy dress I'd bought for the occasion. A little stiff, a little not me, with light makeup I'd had to practice in the mirror the night before. The uniform was a thing my mother brought up to wound, not to describe. She did that. She'd accuse you of something you weren't doing so you'd spend the night defending yourself instead of noticing what she was. "Hi, Mom," I said. She didn't say hi back. She finished Diane's collar and looked me over like a receipt she was double-checking. "We talked about this. Tonight is about your father and me. Try not to make it about the army." I looked at Diane. Diane looked at her shoes. She had a way of going small when our mother was performing. Always did. "I didn't bring the army," I said. "I brought a card. I had to. A real one, with a real check inside, the kind of gift you give people you love even when they make it hard." My mother took it without looking at it and handed it to Diane, who slid it into a bag with all the others. I watched it disappear into the pile and felt something I didn't have a name for yet. Inside, the hall was beautiful and cold. Imported flowers, the expensive kind. I'd helped pay for enough family emergencies to know exactly what flowers cost. A string trio played near a fountain. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays. My father stood by the bar holding a bourbon, telling a story to two men I didn't know, and when he saw me, he lifted his glass an inch and went back to the story. That was the welcome. I found a place near a side table where I could see the exits. Old habit. I'm comfortable on the edge of a room. I notice who's drinking too fast and who keeps checking their phone and who's pretending to laugh. I noticed a man across the room, maybe 70, standing near the windows in a gray suit that didn't fit him quite right, like he'd lost weight since he bought it. He kept looking at me, not unkindly, just looking the way you look at someone you can't place. I didn't think much of it then. I should have. I'll come back to him. The first real cut came about an hour in. A cousin's husband, a loud man named Rick who sold something to do with insurance, came over with a beer and a grin and asked what I did in the service. Before I could answer, my mother appeared at my elbow like she'd been waiting in the wings. "Oh, Margaret pushes paper for the government," she said, with a little laugh that invited everyone else to laugh too. "Glorified accountant. We keep hoping she'll retire and get a real life." A few people chuckled. Rick chuckled. I held my beer and said nothing. Here's what I've learned about silence. People are not comfortable with it. They'll rush to fill it, and what they fill it with usually tells you everything. My mother filled it. "She never married, you know," she went on, lowering her voice to the volume people use when they want you to lean in. "All those years moving around. I always said, Margaret, you can't build a family on a duffel bag." Another little laugh. "But somebody has to do the boring jobs. Somebody has to do the boring jobs." I turned that one over in my head for a second. The boring jobs. I thought about a few things I couldn't talk about and wasn't going to. I drank my beer. "It's good work," I said. That was all. My mother looked almost disappointed, the way she always did when I didn't give her a fight to win. The second cut came at dinner. They'd done a seating chart, of course. Diane's doing. I found my name card at a table near the kitchen doors, next to an empty chair and an elderly aunt who was hard of hearing and mostly talked to her dinner roll. The kitchen doors swung open and shut all through the meal, and each time they did, a gust of warm air came out, smelling like seared meat and floor cleaner. Across the room, at the head table, my parents and Diane's husband Greg sat under a banner with my parents' names on it in gold script. There was an open seat up there. I counted. There was room for one more. The card on it said Riso. I'm telling you the small things, because the small things were the whole language of my family. Nobody ever said, "We don't want you here." They just put your name by the kitchen and reserved the good seat for nobody. The toast started around 9. My father stood up and thanked everyone for coming. He thanked his golf partners. He thanked a business associate. He told a long story about how he and my mother met, which I'd heard 100 times, and which got a little more romantic each year. Then he raised his glass to Diane, "The heart of this family," and everybody said aw, and glasses went up. He never said my name, not once. I sat at the kitchen table with the deaf aunt and the empty chair, and I watched my father toast the heart of the family, and I realized I was not in the family he was describing. I had paid for parts of it. I had rescued parts of it, but I was not in the picture. That was the moment, if you want one, not a scream. Not a slap. Just a glass raised to everyone but me. I didn't make a scene. I want you to know that, because people always want the part where you stand up and let them have it. I didn't. I finished my water. I told the deaf aunt it was a lovely party, and she said the chicken was dry, and she was right. Then I stood up, slow because of the knee, and I walked out to the lobby to get some air. That's where the man in the gray suit found me. He was standing by a tall window looking out at the river, and the rain had started, soft, ticking against the glass. He turned when he heard me, and up close I could see he was older than I'd thought, with the kind of weathered face that spent a lot of years outdoors. He had a small pin on his lapel I recognized. Most people in that room wouldn't have. I did. "Excuse me," he said. "I don't mean to bother you. But you wouldn't happen to be Major Halloran, would you?" Nobody in that hotel had called me by rank all night. I hadn't called myself by it in years. I wasn't even sure how he'd landed on it. "It's Maggie," I said. He smiled, a little embarrassed. "Frank Delaney, I think you knew my son Daniel. He served under you 12 years back." Out at the rotation in Euros, he stopped himself the way men like us learn to stop ourselves. "Well, you know where." I did know where, and I knew Daniel Delaney. I knew exactly which night this old man was about to bring up, and my chest got tight before he said another word. "I almost didn't come tonight," Frank said. "My niece married into this family, Greg's people. I don't really know any of these folks." He looked back out at the rain. "But then I saw you across the room and I thought, no, I'd know her anywhere. Daniel had a photo." I didn't say anything. I'm good at not saying anything. "I wanted to thank you," Frank said. His voice changed. It got careful, the way a voice gets when it's carrying something heavy. "For what you did, when Daniel was hurt. The way I heard it, you sat in that hospital with my boy for 2 days. You didn't have to do that. His mother and I couldn't get there for almost a week. The flights, he stopped again. You stayed. The other officers sent paperwork, you stayed. The lobby was very quiet. Just the rain and the faint string trio coming through the doors. He was a good soldier," I said. It was all I trusted myself to say. Frank Delaney nodded, and his eyes were wet, and he looked away to give us both a second. "He's doing all right now. Walks with a cane, has a little girl. He still talks about you." He laughed rough. "He calls you the major who wouldn't leave. I won't pretend that didn't get to me." After a whole night of my own family putting my name by the kitchen, a stranger in a gray suit had crossed a hotel to tell me I'd mattered to somebody. There's a particular kind of ache in being seen by the wrong people at the wrong time. It tells you exactly what you've been missing. "Thank you for telling me," I said. We talked a few more minutes. He asked about my knee, because of course a man like that noticed the way I'd come down the steps. I asked about Daniel's little girl. And then my mother's voice came across the lobby, sharp as a dropped tray. "Margaret, there you are. People are asking where you went." She came toward us in her good dress, glanced at Frank the way she glanced at the valet, and said, "I hope she's not boring you. She does go on about the service." Frank Delaney looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Then he said, quietly, in a voice that had given orders a long time ago, "Ma'am, your daughter is the reason my son is alive." My mother blinked. For 1 second, just one. She had no script. Then she laughed, that little social laugh, and said, "Well, isn't that nice?" and steered me back toward the party by the elbow like I was a child who'd wandered off. That was the night. That was the anniversary party. I drove home in the rain with my knee screaming, and Frank Delaney's words sitting in my chest, and somewhere around Murfreesboro I said something out loud to nobody. "Okay," I said, and then a few miles later, "I'm done. I thought the worst of it was behind me. I was wrong. The party wasn't the betrayal. It was just the part everybody could see." 11 days later, my mother called. I was at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon, hot and sticky, with a fan in the corner losing its fight against the heat. My coffee had gone cold. Somebody outside was backing up a truck, and the beeper cut through the wall every few seconds. When my mother's name came up on my phone, my stomach tightened before I even touched it. She hadn't called once since the party. No apology, no nothing. "Hello," I said. She didn't say hello back. "Margaret, why isn't the account paying out?" I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it. "What account?" "The Belmont." They called Diane. They said the final balance didn't clear. Her voice had that flat, offended edge. There's apparently some issue on your end. On my end, I repeated. You're listed on the agreement, you know this. I did not know this. I sat up straight and the chair creaked under me. Mom, what agreement? A pause, not a confused pause, a caught one. I'd heard that pause my whole life and I knew exactly what it meant. It meant she'd hoped I wouldn't ask. The venue paperwork, she said, like it was obvious. There was a balance. 18,400 and some. The flowers ran over. Diane said you were down as the backup. It's standard. $18,400. For a party where I sat by the kitchen. I never signed anything, I said. The silence on the other end told me everything and nothing at the same time. Then she shifted tactics, the way she always did. Margaret, don't make this difficult. You have a steady paycheck. You don't have a family to support. Your father and I are stretched thin, and Diane is a zero. I never signed anything, I said again. Quiet, flat. Don't use that tone with me. What's my name on exactly? Don't make this ugly, she said, and there it was. Don't make this ugly. As if the ugly thing was me asking, and not whatever they'd already done. I looked at the little American flag sticker somebody had stuck on our office printer years ago, peeling at one corner, and I said the calmest sentence I've ever said in my life. Mom, it got ugly before you called. Then I hung up. My hands were not steady. I didn't like that. I could brief a roomful of officers without blinking, but my mother could still make me feel 12 years old with one phone call. I sat there for a minute. Then I looked up the Belmont Carriage Hotel and called the events office. A woman answered, bright and professional. I gave my name, and the brightness dimmed. Oh, she said. Mrs. Halloran. We've actually been trying to reach you. That was the first time that day I felt something colder than anger. I'd like copies of anything with my name on it, I said. Today, if possible. Of course. Is there a concern? I'm being told I owe you $18,000 for a party I didn't plan. So yes, there's a concern. A pause on her end now. Let me pull the file, she said carefully. 5 minutes later the email came through. I opened it on my desktop, and I made myself read slowly. Because the thing about my job is that I read documents for a living. I know what a real signature looks like. I know what a forged one looks like, too. There was my full legal name, Margaret Ann Halloran. There was a scan of my Tennessee driver's license, 2 years old. There was an electronic signature on the guarantor line, and the signature was wrong. It looked enough like mine to fool a stranger. The shape was close. But I looped the M without thinking, every time, a little habit from signing thousands of forms over 30 years. Whoever made that signature had copied the look and missed the habit. They'd traced the shape of my name. They hadn't lived inside it. That detail is what made me sick. Not the money. The money I could have fought as a misunderstanding. But a traced signature isn't a misunderstanding. A traced signature is somebody sitting down and deciding to be careful about it. I knew where the driver's license came from. I knew it the second I saw the date. 2 years earlier, during a stretch when I'd been away, my mother had called me almost frantic. My father was having tests, she said. The hospital needed copies of family ID and insurance for some paperwork, she said. She said I was the only one organized enough to get it to her fast. So I'd scanned my license and sent it, because of course I had. That's what I did. I was the one you called. I sat at my desk and I thought about a smaller thing that had happened years before that, a loan application my father had once put my name on, just to check our options, and how I'd been furious and how my mother had cried, and Diane had said I was overreacting, and how I'd let it go. That's the thing about letting somebody cross a line once. They don't remember it as mercy. They remember it as a door that opened. I forwarded the documents to my personal email. I saved copies. I printed everything. By the time the printer stopped, my hands were steady again, and not because I'd calmed down. Something had changed. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was my name, my credit, my career, which has rules about exactly this kind of thing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking myself how to fix their problem. I was asking how far they'd gone. The next morning, I was at the legal office on post before they unlocked the door. I want to be honest about how I felt, because I think it matters. I felt embarrassed. Not them, me. I hadn't forged anything. I hadn't lied to a vendor. And still my face went hot sitting across from a JAG attorney with a folder full of printouts, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. That's what a family like mine teaches you. They make their choices feel like your shame. The attorney was a captain named Teresa Vance. Younger than me, calm in a way that made you trust her and made you a little nervous at the same time. She read through everything without interrupting, which was worse than if she'd gasped. People who say, "Oh my God," are easy. People who go quiet make you wait for the truth. After a while, she set down the contract and tapped the signature line with her pen. "This isn't your signature." "No, you didn't authorize anyone to sign on your behalf. Your sister, your mother, anyone." "No, you didn't agree to act as a financial guarantor. Verbally or in writing." "No." She nodded slowly. "Then I want you to stop thinking about this as a family disagreement. Legally, what you're describing is identity misuse, possibly forgery." The word sat in the room. Forgery. It sounded too big for my family, too official. I pictured Diane at the head table under the gold banner, and my stomach turned. Captain Vance must have seen my face change, because her voice softened a little. "I'm not telling you what to do about your family. That part's yours, but I'm telling you what I'd tell any soldier sitting where you're sitting. Protect yourself first. Dispute every charge in writing. Don't argue by phone if you can help it. Don't admit responsibility in any form, even to be polite. And if they used your ID, lock your credit down today." I let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Happy anniversary season." She almost smiled. "Family cases are the ugliest ones I see, every time." I believed her. That afternoon, I started making calls from my truck on my lunch break, because I didn't trust the walls at work to be thin in one direction only. The venue first, then the florist, then the caterer. I kept my voice level. That took effort. Every call felt like walking into a room where people had been talking about me before I got there. The florist remembered me right away. "Oh yes, Maggie. Your sister said you were handling the final flowers." Handling, such a soft word for it. The caterer had an email chain. Diane had written, "My sister Margaret is our backup on the balance. She's military, very stable, no kids." I read that line 3 times. Very stable, no kids. Like a woman without a husband and children was just money sitting in a drawer waiting to be useful. My truck needed tires. My couch came off a marketplace listing. But in Diane's version of the world, my whole life was a checking account she'd been authorized to draw from. By Friday, I had a stack of evidence on my kitchen table. Printed emails, contracts, screenshots, a spiral notebook with dates and times, and the name of every person I'd spoken to. I've kept inventory records, clean enough to survive federal audits. Once I stopped shaking, the documentation came easy. That was the first thing I understood that week. They had counted on Margaret the daughter. They had not planned for the woman who does this for a living. Saturday morning, the events coordinator from the Belmont called me back. Her name was Paula, and her voice was careful in a new way. "Mrs. Halloran, I found something in the account you should probably know about. The electronic signature has a recovery email attached. It isn't yours." My kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere outside a lawnmower was going, and a dog barked twice. Normal Saturday sounds. The sounds of people whose families weren't coming apart. "Whose is it?" I said. She read it to me. It was Diane's. Not hidden, not disguised. Diane's regular email, the one with her married name already in it. She hadn't even tried to cover it. I stood there holding the phone, barefoot on the cold tile, and the anger I expected came, but underneath it was something heavier. Grief. The kind that makes you sit down because your body suddenly feels old. I remembered Diane at 5 years old, refusing to walk into kindergarten unless I went with her to the door. I remembered buying her a purple backpack the year our mothers said money was tight. I had spent my whole life being the door Diane walked through, and she had used the shape of my name, like a spare key she'd had cut without asking. I thought that was the bottom of it. It wasn't, but it was close. I called my mother that night. Captain Vance would not have approved. I knew that. I called anyway, because some part of me still wanted an explanation that hurt less than the truth. She answered on the 4th ring. "Are you ready to stop being cruel?" I almost hung up. Instead, I said, "Did you give Diane my license?" A silence. "Long enough." "Mom, did you give Diane the copy of my driver's license? The one you said was for Dad's hospital paperwork." "She needed information for the venue," my mother said. "She needed my ID to put my name on a contract I never signed." "Don't use that word." "What word should I use?" She was overwhelmed. There was a lot of pressure. Greg's family has expectations, and everything was already arranged, and we couldn't very well embarrass ourselves in front of a Euros. "So you embarrassed me instead." She didn't answer that, and in not answering, she answered, Did Dad know? I asked. Your father doesn't need the stress. Which meant yes. Maybe not every detail, but enough. I sat at my kitchen table until past midnight with the papers spread out in front of me. I didn't sleep much that weekend. I ate things I didn't want. Crackers and cold leftovers and a handful of chocolate chips straight from the bag. And then I was annoyed at myself, which was useless, but honest. By Monday, my dress slacks felt tight at the waist, and I stood in the mirror and looked at a 54-year-old woman with tired eyes and a bad knee and a family that treated her strength like public property. I'll tell you the part I'm least proud of. I almost paid it. I actually opened my banking app that Monday morning and looked at my savings. Not because they deserved it. Because I wanted quiet. I thought maybe if I just absorb this one, the calls stop, and everybody moves on, and I get my Sunday afternoons back. That's how it works, you know. The reason you keep paying isn't that you're weak. It's that you're tired and peace has a price, and they know you'll pay it. Then an email came in. Final notice, from the Belmont's billing office. My name in the subject line attached to their debt. And something in me settled, not snapped. Settled like a thing finding the floor. I opened a blank email and wrote one sentence first. I do not authorize these charges and I dispute all financial responsibility. Then I attached the documents, the timeline, the forgery, the recovery email. I copied Captain Vance. I sent a version to every vendor. Then I froze my credit, changed my passwords, filed an identity theft report at the federal site the captain had given me, and saved every text my family had sent. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sick and scared, and like I'd stepped onto a road I couldn't walk back down. But for the first time since the party, the question in my head wasn't how do I save them. It was how do I save myself. Here is something nobody tells you about setting a boundary. The people who benefited from you not having one will treat it like an attack. For about 2 weeks my phone was a war zone. Texts, voicemails, missed calls, even messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I answered a few at first. That was a mistake. Every conversation ran the same script. Nobody wanted to talk about a forged signature or a stolen ID. They wanted to talk about how hurt Diane was, how stressed my mother was, how disappointed my father was. My feelings had somehow become the least interesting thing in the whole situation. So I stopped answering, not coldly. I just moved everything to writing. Short, factual, documented. And the second guilt stopped working. My family didn't know what to do with me. My mother texted, "After everything we've done for you." I looked at that one for a full minute. After everything we've done for you. I thought about $8,412, and a purple backpack, and 2 days in a hospital chair that nobody in my own family had ever sat in for me. I deleted 3 different replies. Finally I wrote, "Please direct all communication about the Belmont charges through email. Nothing else. No anger, no defense. Just a wall." She hated the wall. 3 minutes later my phone rang. I let it go. Then my father called, then Diane. I let all of them go to voicemail and listened that night out on my porch with the radio off. The first voicemail was my mother crying. The second was my mother yelling. The third accused me of destroying the family. The fourth was my father, and all he said was, "Your mother isn't doing well." 5 words. 22 years of how this family worked, packed into 5 words. Fix it. The next morning there was a text from my father waiting when I got to my desk. "I've always been proud of your service." I nearly choked on my coffee. There it was. The emergency compliment. The thing you break the glass for in a fire. My father had spent decades telling neighbors I'd never settled down, asking if I planned to act like a soldier forever, looking past me at every holiday table. But now, with $18,000 hanging over the family, I was suddenly a point of pride. I sent the screenshot to my friend Donna, who I'd served with years back. 30 seconds later she wrote, "Frame it." I laughed harder than I'd laughed in a month. Apparently, all it took for my father to respect the uniform was a catering bill. Then, that Friday, Greg called. Diane's husband, the man my sister had stood next to at the head table while my father toasted the heart of the family. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did. "Maggie," he said, I don't think we've ever really talked. Just the 2 of us." "No," I said, "we haven't." He took a breath. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." "Okay, did you really skip the planning, the deposits, all of it?" "Diane said you refused to help. She said you told her. Months ago, you didn't approve of how much they were spending, and that you wanted nothing to do with it. She said." That's why you sat in the back at the party. Because you were making a point. I closed my eyes. Of course she had a story. Of course. Cutting me out wasn't enough. She needed a version where I was the villain, where she was the one who'd been let down. I sat down on the concrete step outside the building. Greg, I said carefully. I drove 6 hours to that party. I got there 17 minutes early. I brought a check. My mother told me, my uniform looked cheap and I wasn't even wearing it. They sat me by the kitchen and reserved the open seat at the head table for nobody. Silence on the line. And I never agreed to pay for anything, I said. I found out I was on the contract when your mother-in-law called to ask why my account wasn't covering the flowers. My signature was traced off my driver's license. I can send you the file. That's not a euro, he stopped. Diane said a euro. I know what Diane said. I'm telling you what happened. You don't have to believe me, but I can show you. I sent him the photo I'd taken from the parking lot that night, the one with the timestamp, the hotel entrance in the rain. Then the seating card with my name by the kitchen. Then the contract with the trace signature and the recovery email in Diane's name. The phone was quiet for a long time. Then Greg said, in a voice that had gone completely flat, "She told me you didn't even come." "I came," I said. "She told everyone you didn't come." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Over the next hour, sitting on that step while the afternoon went gold and then gray, Greg told me things I hadn't known. Diane had run most of the wedding finances when they got married, too, and the anniversary party, and there'd always been a pattern. Whenever a number got too big, she had a line ready. Maggie will cover it. Maggie's got it. Maggie won't mind. He said it the way you'd report a thing you'd heard 100 times without ever once hearing it. Then he said, I found an email, and forwarded it to me while we were still on the phone. It was short. Diane had sent it to Greg before the party, when he'd apparently asked gently whether they could really afford the venue. And in the middle of it was one line. Don't worry about the final balance. Maggie will cover it. She always does. I read it at a red light on my way home and I had to pull over. Not because of the money. Because of how easy it was. How casual. She wrote it the way you'd write don't worry about the napkins. Like I was a line item. Like I was a thing the family owned. 3 days later, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. And I picked up before I clocked it was her. The second I heard her voice, I knew I'd made a mistake. What did you do? She screamed. What did you say to Greg? I sent him paperwork, I said. You poisoned that boy against his own wife, and there it was. Not the forgery, not the lie, not the stolen ID. The crime to her was that somebody had found out the truth. I waited until she ran out of steam. Then I said, Mom, if the truth does this much damage, maybe the problem was never me. I ended the call. That night, Greg texted me one line. I'm asking everyone to come to a meeting at Aunt Ruth's. We need to do this with the whole family in the room. I sat on my porch and read it 3 times. The rain had come back, soft on the roof. My knee ached, the way it does. The storm I'd been driving away from all summer was finally going to catch me. And for the first time, I wasn't going to be standing in it alone. The meeting happened on a Sunday at my Aunt Ruth's house in Cleveland, Tennessee, a half-hour up the road from Chattanooga. If you'd asked me where the biggest reckoning of my life would happen, I'd have guessed a courtroom, not a brick ranch house with wind chimes on the porch and ceramic frogs in the flower beds. But that's how it usually goes. The big family disasters don't happen in dramatic places. They happen in kitchens that smell like coffee and cinnamon rolls. I got there 10 minutes early. Army habit. You show up early enough to get your feet under you. I sat in the truck a minute first. My knee was bad. The July heat shimmered off the driveway. I thought about turning around. Then I thought about a glass raised to the heart of the family, and an open seat reserved for nobody. And I got out. Aunt Ruth opened the door before I knocked. She was 76, maybe 5 feet tall in shoes, and tougher than most people I'd served with. She pulled me into a quick, hard hug and didn't say anything sentimental, which is the only reason it didn't break me. You okay? She asked. Working on it, good enough. Inside, everyone was already there. My mother, my father, Diane, Greg, 2 cousins. My Uncle Roy in the corner not knowing where to look. A tray of cinnamon rolls sat untouched in the middle of the table. Nobody wanted dessert. The room went quiet when I walked in. Diane looked smaller than I remembered. The party glow was gone. She stared at her hands. Greg sat next to her but not close. My mother crossed her arms. That old posture, the one that meant she'd already decided who was guilty. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. I took a seat. Nobody spoke. Finally, Aunt Ruth poured herself a coffee and said, "All right, who wants to lie first?" My mother stiffened. "Ruth, that's not helpful." "No," Aunt Ruth said. "Then let's try honest." Nobody volunteered, so my mother jumped in, the way she always did. Margaret has always made things difficult during family matters. Ever since she was young, I let her go for a few sentences. Then I reached into my bag and took out the folder. The same folder that had basically become my emotional support animal for a month. I set it on the table. "I think we should stick to facts," I said. "Margareta, we're doing facts today," I said. Quiet. Not a request. The room went still. I started at the beginning, not the party. Further back. I told them about the $8,000 6 years ago that I never mentioned again. About the loan application with my name on it before that. About the license I'd scanned in good faith for a hospital that, as far as I could tell, never needed it. Every time my mother tried to interrupt, I slid another document across the table. The loan, the license scan, the timestamp. Eventually she stopped trying, because the paper kept arriving and it didn't care about her tone. Then I got to the contract. I laid it down and tapped the signature line, the way Captain Vance had tapped it for me. "This is my name," I said. "This is not my signature." I looped the M. Whoever did this didn't know that. They traced it off the license that left my hands 2 years ago. I looked up. "I want to be clear about what that is. That's not a misunderstanding. You don't trace a signature by accident." Greg spoke then. His voice was exhausted. "Diane told me Maggie didn't come to the party at all." Diane started to cry, not loud, just enough. I knew that cry. Growing up, it had worked like a reset button. People stopped asking questions and started rescuing. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't move toward the cry. I just waited. "I was scared," Diane said to the table. I didn't know what to do. "Scared people ask for help," I said. The room was silent. "They don't trace your sister's name onto a contract." Diane looked up at me then, the first time all day. "I always thought you'd understand," she whispered. "You always fixed everything." "I didn't think it would, She stopped. "You didn't think it would what?" I said. "Cost me anything?" "It's a federal matter, Diane. For me. Not for you, for me. The job I have has rules about exactly this. You didn't just borrow my name. You put my whole career on a line you couldn't see, because you never bothered to learn what I actually do." My mother cut in, fast. "Nobody stole anything. This is being blown completely out of euros." And that's when the doorbell rang. Aunt Ruth got up to answer it, and I want to tell you I planned the timing, but I didn't. Captain Vance had said she'd try to come by that afternoon to drop off the formal dispute confirmation, the official one, the one that made the whole thing real on paper. She'd offered. I'd said sure, not thinking she'd actually walk into the middle of a family meeting. But there she was, in her dress uniform, because she'd come straight from a ceremony on post, with a folder of her own under her arm. The room changed when she stepped in. You could feel it. A woman in uniform walks into a Tennessee living room and people sit up a little. My mother's mouth opened and then closed. "I'm sorry," Captain Vance said, reading the room in about half a second the way good officers do. I didn't mean to interrupt. "Maggie, I have the confirmation for you. I can leave it in the truck of euros." "It's fine," I said. "Stay a minute." She looked around the table and her eyes landed on the folder I'd been slide documents out of, and she understood. She set her own folder down next to mine gently. "I'll only say one thing," she said to the room in that calm, flat voice. "Because it isn't my family and it isn't my place. But I've spent a lot of time with these documents this month." She paused. "What was done here would be a serious matter for any civilian. For someone who holds the position Major holds with the clearances she holds, it could have ended a 30-year career." She caught it in time. Barely. She looked at me. "You should know that what your sister and your mother put together didn't just risk money. It risked everything she's built. I'll leave the confirmation here. Maggie, call me if you need anything." And she left. The position she holds. The clearances she holds. A 30-year career. Nobody in that room had ever heard those words about me. I had never said them. I never would have. That's the rule I'd lived by my whole life. You don't announce what you are. You let the work speak, or you let it stay quiet. For 30 years it had stayed quiet, and my family had filled that quiet with glorified accountant and pushes paper, and somebody has to do the boring jobs. Now a stranger in a uniform had set the truth on the table and walked out, and my family had to sit with it. My father spoke for the first time. Maggie, his voice was wrong. Cracked. I didn't know it was a euro, he stopped. I thought it was just a desk. I know you did, Dad, I said. You never asked. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Not the comfortable kind. Then Aunt Ruth did something I'll remember for the rest of my life. She got up, went to a kitchen drawer, and came back with a little spiral notebook, the kind older people keep for phone numbers and grocery lists. She put on her glasses and flipped a few pages. Diane, she said, last spring you borrowed $6,500 from me. You told me it was a medical thing. She looked over her glasses. Was there a medical thing? The room froze. Diane went euro. Was there? No, Diane whispered. Ruth nodded like she'd known. That's what I figured. She held up the notebook. You know why I write things down? Because I'm old, not stupid. For the first time all day, somebody laughed. Uncle Roy, in the corner, a short surprised bark of a laugh he tried to swallow. Even my father's mouth twitched. Diane didn't laugh. Neither did my mother. And I wasn't the only one, was I, Ruth said. She looked around the table. Roy, didn't she get you for something at Christmas? Roy shifted. 1,200, he muttered. For car repairs. There weren't any car repairs. One of the cousins spoke up quietly. Another loan. Another emergency that turned out not to be one. None of them huge. But together they made a shape. And everybody at that table could see the shape now. Because Ruth had been writing it down for years, while the rest of us were too light or too tired to keep a record. And under every single one of those numbers was the same quiet assumption. Maggie will cover it. Maggie always does. I looked at my sister. Really looked at her. She wasn't a monster. Did the judge remain silent? She wasn't some criminal mastermind. She was a woman who had her whole life believing that consequences were a thing that happened to other people, and she had finally run out of other people to hand them to. And I said the thing I'd been carrying for 54 years. I didn't plan it. It just came out level and quiet. I'm not the family bank, I said. Nobody moved. I'm not the backup plan. I'm not the name you put on a contract when the real money runs out. And I'm not the daughter you keep by the kitchen until there's a bill. My mother started to cry, and for the first time in my life it wasn't a performance. It was the real thing, the ugly kind, the kind you can't aim at anybody. Greg stood up. Diane, he said, I think we need some time apart. Diane flinched. My mother gasped. Nobody argued, because everybody in that room finally understood why. The meeting went on another hour, but the truth had already landed and there was nothing to do but sit in it. There was no screaming match. No big revenge speech. I didn't get one, and I found I didn't want one. When I finally stood up to leave, my knee stiff under me, nobody told me to stay. Nobody told me what I owed. For once in my life, nobody handed me the bill. Aunt Ruth walked me out to the porch. The evening had cooled. The wind chimes were going. You did right, she said. It doesn't feel like winning. It never does, honey. She patted my arm. The right thing and the good feeling don't always show up on the same day. Sometimes the feeling takes a while to catch up. I drove home in the last of the light. The sky over the hills was that deep bruised orange you only get after a hot day. And for once my knee was quiet, which I took as a kindness. Here's the part people don't expect. After the meeting, nothing happened. And that was the hardest part of all. People think these stories end with the confrontation. They don't. Real life just keeps going. Monday still came. The young specialist still ordered the wrong parts. The trucks were still overdue for service. The world didn't pause because my family had finally cracked open in a living room in Cleveland, Tennessee. And honestly, the routine was a mercy. For weeks I'd been living inside legal forms and old wounds. Now I had inventory sheets and maintenance logs, and I could stand on them. The venue moved the balance back to the people who'd actually signed. Captain Vance helped me file the last of it. The fraud report stayed on record. The disputed charges came off mine. My credit took a temporary hit while it all got investigated, and then it recovered. The damage wasn't permanent. For the first time in months, I started sleeping through the night. Not every night, but enough to notice. When you've spent years carrying other people's emergencies, peace feels suspicious at first. You keep waiting for the next call. But the call didn't come. And something I hadn't expected happened. When I stopped fixing everything, people slowly started solving their own problems. Not gracefully, not fast, but they did. My mother still texted. At first the messages looked just like the old ones, guilt and pressure and little reminders about loyalty. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just stopped playing. A boundary only holds if you stop negotiating it. Over the weeks, the texts got shorter, then quieter, then rare. My father called twice. The first call lasted 4 minutes and was mostly weather. The second lasted longer. Near the end of it, he said, "I should have said something." At the party. "When she said that about your uniform." I should have said something. For most of my life, my father avoided conflict by pretending it wasn't happening. There was nowhere left to hide now. "I know, Dad," I said. "We didn't say anything else about it. We didn't have to." Diane disappeared for a while. She and Greg lived apart. Not divorced, not officially anything, just two people trying to figure out whether there was a marriage left under all of it. I didn't ask for details. It wasn't my job to manage anymore. In October, I moved into a smaller place closer to base. Most people would have called it a downgrade. I loved it. Quieter. No rooms I didn't use. A balcony that looked out over a row of maples that were turning red and gold. I kept the $40 rocking chair. And a few weeks after that, I drove out to a county shelter and adopted an old dog. Part lab, part mystery, gray around the muzzle, one ear up and one ear down, and absolutely convinced that every human being existed to provide snacks. The shelter guessed he was about 8. I named him Biscuit. We understood each other right away. Two tired souls looking for something quieter. I started seeing a counselor too, which surprised me more than anybody. The Army had offered it for years, and I'd always said I was fine. I wasn't broken. But I was exhausted, and those are different things. In one session, she said something that stayed with me. "You learned that being needed was the same as being loved." I sat with that a long time, because she was right. Every bill I paid, every problem I solved, every crisis I absorbed, I felt valuable. Useful. But useful and loved are not the same word, and when you spend 50 years confusing them, you end up carrying weight that was never yours to carry. In early December on a rainy Tuesday, Diane called. I looked at the phone a long moment. Biscuit lifted his head off the couch. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she sighed, tired, not for effect. Hi. The old me would have rushed to fill the quiet. This version waited. Silence has a way of making people fill it themselves. "I owe you an apology," Diane said finally. "No excuses attached, no mention of money or stress or our mother." That alone got my attention. I stayed quiet. "I was jealous of you," she said. That I didn't expect. Diane had been the favorite our whole lives. The pretty one. The protected one. "Jealous of what?" I said. "You were the one everybody trusted, even when they didn't say it. Even when they treated you like a Euros." She stopped. "I kept telling myself you'd handle whatever it was. Because you always handled everything, and somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing how unfair that was to you. I made you into a thing instead of a person. It was easier that way." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm really sorry." Outside, the rain ticked against the window. Biscuit had gone back to snoring. I felt something that wasn't quite forgiveness, and wasn't quite peace, closer to acceptance. The thing that shows up before forgiveness does, if you're lucky. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. She laughed, wet and small. "I don't expect anything from it. I don't expect us to be Euros. I just needed you to know I see it now." "I hear you," I said. And then, because it was true, "It means something that you called." We talked another 10 minutes. Nothing magical. Just two adults trying to be honest with each other, maybe for the first time. When we hung up, I wished her well. That was all. No promise to fix anything. No money. Just well wishes. And somehow that was healthier than every version of us that had come before. A few months later, on a cold, clear evening, I was out on the balcony with Biscuit asleep against my foot, and I found myself thinking about the anniversary party again. Not with anger. Not even sadness anymore. Just a kind of clear-eyed distance. For most of my life, I'd imagined that being vindicated would feel like fireworks, like justice arriving with a band. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt like sleeping through the night. It felt like opening my banking app without my stomach dropping. It felt like answering my phone without bracing. It felt like understanding, finally, that you can love your family and still not hand them unlimited access to your life. I want to say one more thing, and then I'll let you go. I've thought a lot about why I held on as long as I did. 22 years of being the one they called and never the one they invited. And I think the truth is that nobody hands you their dignity to carry. You give it away yourself, a little at a time, every time you confuse being needed with being loved. I gave mine away in $8,000 pieces and scanned licenses and seats by the kitchen, and I called it being a good daughter. It wasn't. It was just paying for a place at a table that should have already been mine. If you've ever been the strong one, the dependable one, the person everybody leans on and nobody protects, I hope you'll hear the one thing it took me 54 years to learn. Being dependable is not the same as being disposable. You are allowed to be the kind of person who shows up for people and still draw a line where the using starts. Caring about your family does not require spending your own dignity to do it. Frank Delaney's son still calls me the major who wouldn't leave. I've thought about that a lot. It was the proudest thing anybody said to me that whole summer. And it came from a stranger in a gray suit, not from anyone who shared my last name. For a long time that would have made me sad. It doesn't anymore, because here's what I finally understand. The people who respect you for the right reasons will tell you to your face. The people who only respect what you can do for them will tell you when the bill comes due. Learn the difference early. It'll save you about 22 years. Biscuit shifted against my foot. The maples had dropped their last leaves. I pulled my coat a little tighter, and I sat out there in the quiet, a while longer. And for once in my life, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring.